Okay, everybody, let's continue with our work session. Mr. Wolby, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're going to start off our discussions with the utilities, with Anchorage Wastewater and Utility. The general manager is out today, but with us today is David Persinger and Glenda Gibson from Finance. So for AWU in your packet, we've got it divided into two, the water and then the wastewater. So the first few slides relate to the water utility. This is an 8-year summary. And I think, without going line by line, the thing I do want to point out is about the 5th line down. Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility is proposing to provide a dividend starting in 2018 at roughly $3 million. I like that. They have some other, I think, minor adjustments across the board, but I think overall the utility in our initial high-level overview is not going to be having a rate increase. So I think with that, the next slide has to do with their revenues and expenses. And there's really no significant changes here. They do have some adjustments in their personnel across the entire utility. So before we get in, and then the capital, similarly for the water utility, they have some recommended projects, some things that they've been working on that they're working to complete, some things that they want to start. So we can ask specific questions about each one of those. And then if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, we can go through the water, and then if you have questions, or if you'd like me to review the wastewater and then do it as a package, it's up to you, Madam Chair.
Let's do one at a time.
Okay, so let's stick with the water utility. So I'll turn it over to you, Madam Chair, with Glenda and Dave's help.
Thank you, Mr. Wolby. Ms. Johnston?
Yes, I noticed with both the water and wastewater, as far as the less the non-cash, basically I call it the depreciation, and it's not up by a lot, but it seems that there's a couple $100,000 difference between what we're appropriating versus what the depreciation cost is. And I noticed it in, I think, both water and wastewater. Is that any reason? You've got depreciation at 11,427, and you've taken out what I've assumed is depreciation as 11,222.
The non-cash, because there's more than just depreciation in that non-cash item, that 11,222 is actually 11,427 in depreciation, amortization of debt expense of 295,000, and AFUDC, our interest during construction, reduces that by $500,000. That's the difference between the two, because the non-cash items is depreciation, capitalized interest, and amortization of debt expenses.
Okay, thank you. And just for clarification on the capital program, you're looking at maintenance and replacement similar to, I think we extended out the time period in which replacement is done from 20 years to 40 or 50 years. Timeline, and you're still following the same replacement that we have for the last 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnston. Mr. Trainee?
Question, I see the dividend starting in 2018. Do we have to go to the RCA for permission to do that, or are we just going to put it in here and hope they don't?
No, we actually do have to go to the RCA with a petition to lift the dividend restriction. We've started working on preparing that filing. That's why we actually put it in here out in 2018. That gives us time to prepare the filing, take it to the RCA, and give them time for their process.
Okay, would you keep us posted as it goes on? Because I want to know if there are results with the RCA.
Okay, we'll
As we look in the out years, we want to make sure we've got that stream coming in.
Okay.
Thank you, madam.
We expect to actually have the filing prepared by around first quarter next year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Quinn?
I was also interested in the depreciation schedule, and I was surprised that it jumped almost 10% year over year. Can you help me understand what the factors were in that?
Part of that factor is that we have actually predicted to overrun our depreciation budget for 2015. We estimated a little bit low and ended up being low in our budget for 2015. And then with new plant additions, it increases on top of that.
Okay, please break down for me, you don't have to do it now, but
Okay.
we're getting an omnibus document. How much of this is overrun from 15 and how much of it is in addition to contributed plan?
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. I'm going to seize this moment to make a comment, not necessarily to do with budgets, but it's a good time for me to make this comment. When we receive assembly documents, I really appreciate the way AWW provides fund certification, because you have a piece of paper in the back that shows how much is in a certain fund, what the appropriation is that you're certifying, and then the balance. Okay, and I really like seeing that. You know what I'm talking about, correct? Yeah, I really appreciate that. And actually, I'd like to see that with all fund certifications we around it. We can talk about it. in
Yes, look
detail.
forward to it. That's primarily the purview of the CFO, but I'm sure he'd be glad to hear your guidance on that issue.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Mr. Flynn?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I forgot to ask my question. Listen to my notes here. Not that I mind, and I'm sure our neighbors won't mind either, but I was just curious about the decision to keep rates stable for the year that is not necessarily a consequence of what we've heard in the past.
The lack of a rate increase in 2016 is a result of doing a revenue requirement study. Our rate increases follow a very structured process with the RCA where we do a full study and say, okay, can we or can we not, under these guidelines, justify a rate increase? And in looking at it, it looked like we could justify at most 1% rate increase for 2016. And at that point, it becomes questionable as to whether you're going to spend more money trying to get 1% than you would actually collect.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just looking under the connected water utility revenues and expenses at the bottom. It's showing that you have 6 more full-time positions for 2016 versus 2015. Just wondering why the expansion in personnel? Do we have a big project that's coming up, or?
So there's a net gain of 6 FTEs. 2 of those are for our customer service call center. We've done a large study over the last couple of years, and our call drop rate and whatnot is too high, and so that's where 2 of those positions are going. The other 4 positions are for our operations and maintenance division, and they're for a project that we've been wrestling with for quite a while. Is large diameter interceptor cleanings. These are large diameter sewers that have a lot of debris in them. We've looked at bringing contractors up in the past. It's very expensive. It only does a small amount of work that we need done. So we're looking at purchasing the equipment and then getting staff and getting them trained up to be able to do that, and do that as an ongoing program to get these large diameter interceptors cleaned out and potentially avoid the liability of a large sewer overflow.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I don't see any other questions. Oh, Mr. Quinn?
Yeah, where's the equipment in the capital budget?
That is in the stuff in the
Wastewater side?
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Please continue, Mr. Goldberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, I segue. Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Let's move over to the wastewater side. Similarly, the water, catch up as well. Wastewater side. Obviously, the dividend that's being proposed is only on the water utility, not the wastewater. And so I don't think that there's any significant changes in their 8-year plan from the one that's already been approved. there's some adjustments there. They're going to their revenues and their expenses. Again, I'll point out that the position count that you see at the bottom is for both water and wastewater, as David mentioned. The 4 of them will be in the wastewater side, and then they have a light capital program on the wastewater side, anchored to water and wastewater utilities. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to you and David and Linda.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Yes, on your first page there, the 8-year summary, it seems like the debt equity is creeping up in the out years. What's causing that?
That is the result of the capital program, and a big part of that is a result of having to replace the Cont'd wastewater treatment facility. This is a projection based on what we know today of when we'll actually start construction on the main plant out there and the impact of the debt we'll have to issue to build that.
And do we, I don't get it confused, primary, tertiary. What is it? Tertiary. Will that have to be a tertiary?
Yeah, it's a particularly, because the outfall is into an anadromous stream. So there's really no opportunity for even having an opportunity to challenge that determination. That will be essentially tertiary or even worse or better.
I'm just trying to think, and there's no other location.
We've looked at a large variety of options.
This is the least expensive of the options that are available, and it's $70 million?
I think the total budget is approximately $76 million.
Yeah. For, less than 1,000 meters or 1,000 customers.
Anything else, Ms. Johnson? Thank you. Doesn't look like Mr. Flynn.
I just want to tell
Sorry.
you, if we're using the anadromous and tertiary conversation.
Sorry, I know what they mean.
Dealing with it since I was in college. Same question about depreciation. I'd like to answer for wastewater as well. And then the follow-up on where's the capital for the additional employees on the list here?
Go to the next.
2 more down, 1 more down.
It's the large diameter sewer cleaning equipment. It's about a third of the way down, or 2/3 of the way down. There's a little King Street
1.67 million.
And that's the capital expense for equipment and training for the folks that we offer.
Oh, so that's capital and training, and we're funding it out of that office.
This is on the capital side, yeah.
But it'll be funded from the depreciation. That's where the depreciation goes, and it'll buy the new gear.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Steele?
Is there a way to work, make an investment rather than going to a contractor to purchase the equipment and do those cleanouts? I guess the question is that equipment in between cleanouts going to sit in a yard somewhere, or are we going to phase it out so that it's always in use?
No, once we purchase it, we'll maintain and operate it in the coming years. We cycle through these large diameter mains, and at some point we'll have to go back and start doing it again, similar to what we're doing with smaller lines.
Is there a market for us to rent it out, or lease it out? I mean,
We won't, it'll be a continuous
it'll be a
service.
continuous use.
Yeah.
Right now, we're hiring a contractor continuously to do that.
We haven't hired a contractor. We've done some work with our crews, and we have very inadequate equipment for large diameter service, so it's very impractical to do.
So we're gonna have to clean it up.
Yeah, and we'll have the equipment to be able to actually do it ourselves and not bring a contractor up to the lower page.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Ms. Johnston?
This would show my ignorance. But you just said that you're funding it through depreciation and we appropriate minus depreciation. So I'm missing, I'm confused here in my very, very basic 40-year-old accounting.
Okay, the difference is depreciation is a non-cash expense, but it runs through our income statement and becomes a part of our rates. So we collect cash from the ratepayers to cover the depreciation expense, but we don't actually pay it out to anybody. It accumulates cash that then we put back into capital.
When you approve the capital budget, you'll be appropriating that funds at that time. So the distinction is that in the operating budget, you're not appropriating it, but you are when you approve the capital budget.
You're appropriating it once instead of twice.
Right, and I remember when we went to this system of appropriating the expense, minus depreciation, what that was. So if you do it with anything other than capital, you basically can't, unless you reappropriate.
Right. It's either capital or it becomes part of our operating budget, so.
Right, and if there's more depreciation than there is appropriation in the capital budget, it just flows through to the equity of the enterprise.
Anything else, Ms. Johnson?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just don't have any idea what SCADA equipment is.
That's our supervisory control and data acquisition system. It's what we do use to run our distribution system, our inspection systems, and our treatment plants. We can actually run our systems in many of our plants with that. It's basically it's a computerized control system, remote control system, and that's upgrades to equipment. It's technology-based equipment, so there's limited life.
Great.
So it includes sensing equipment throughout the water and wastewater systems, and then the connections between that sensing equipment and the controlling centers. As David said, there's several of them, so that from any number of different places, someone can run the entire operation.
We did work on those measures, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I don't see any other questions. Mr. Wilbur, please continue.
Good job, guys.
So our next department is Merrill Field. I don't believe that I see Merrill Field in the back yet, so we may jump ahead if that's okay with you, Madam Chair. We are ahead of schedule. So next up, we have Municipal Light and Power. So Molly's here. I know that Mr. Johnson is out of town.
Yeah.
So
Come on up, Molly. Madam Chairman, I don't know how many of you know, have met Molly Morrison yet? Molly's the recently appointed CFO for MLP.
Thank you.
Mark Johnson's out of town, and so Molly will be the one that will be helping us answer your questions today.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Welcome, Lauren. Thank you.
So similar to Anchorage Wastewater and Utility, we start off with an 8-year summary. Don't believe that there's any significant highlights in here. I think that we have Plant 2A will be coming online, recognizing that it was an 8-year summary. And as far as their revenues and their expenses, I'll have Ms. Morrison and the department speak to those, but from the OMB's perspective, I think the one change that we'll want to speak to is probably the other, what the difference between the 15 and the 3. And then from a capital program, I think that the utility is similar to AWU. They have projects that they're working on, projects they're completing, and projects they want to initiate to maintain their existing network for the utilities. So I think with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to you and folks with MLP and Municipal Manager.
Thank you, Ms. Johnston.
Yes, I was noticing with your debt equity ratio, it's not showing much of an impact from Plant 2A. How is that happening?
We're looking at slide 37, Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Jennifer, could you repeat that?
I just, there doesn't seem to be an impact for bringing on plant 2A as far as the debt equity. And I would think that we're gonna refinance it at some point through a revenue bond or some kind of bonding.
Yes. We've already actually refinanced about half of it.
Okay.
In 2015 was a good year
Yeah.
for issuing bonds, so we issued 185 million in bonds in, actually at the end of 2014. And it is our intention to issue bonds in the last quarter of 2016. So it would be a minimal effect because of that.
But we've the debt is already on board now as in the commercial paper program. So it's already showing in there. It'll just get cheaper once we convert that to.
I thought we were doing the commercial paper program as an ongoing process, so I didn't realize that we had actually capitalized it.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Train.
On dividend, are we projecting it'll never come back again? Because I see nothing for 2021. I thought it was only 5-year.
So for the purposes of this document, because we don't have a time certain when it can come back, it's not anticipated here. We're certainly making a concerted effort to get it back. It will not come back for 2016.
No, we don't have.
We're working on a plan that could get it back at some level, perhaps not at the historic rate, but at some level as early as 2017. But that is still an unknown, and as a result, we didn't put it in the summary here. But it remains a priority for the administration to continue to work towards the RCA permission for a reasonable dividend.
Did they give us a time date at all associated with their ruling?
No, they just said that we're not in the appropriate condition at this time or based on the out-year plan in the foreseeable future. So, but it does not preclude us from coming back. We will be bringing rate cases back, and we will be able to bring something specific to the dividend back to them probably next year to take effect in 2017.
What legal team are we putting together to take this rate case back to?
We have regulatory counsel on board now, and I suppose that could change, but at this point, we're working with the regulatory counsel that MLP has had for a number of years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Dio?
Where does, we have a portion of the blue and gas field. Does that just show up, the only place it shows up is in our price of fuel? Where does that show up on the city books?
Are you referring to the value of it, or
Yeah.
are you referring?
Oh, well, cost, everything. I mean, we have ownership in it, so.
Yes, we own 1/3, so it shows up everywhere. It shows up in costs.
Just in fuel prices, fuel costs.
Yes. The portion of our fuel that we pull from the Beluga Field, from our interest in the Beluga Field, we pay ourselves an appropriate fuel cost, which is set by the RCA, and that is passed on to our ratepayers. It's much lower than the avoided fuel cost, but it is a cost.
What about all the calculations with regards to value of the field, drawdown, depreciation of the field, maintenance of the field? And is the only place it shows up is in the cost of fuel?
No.
No, we have capital assets associated with that. Depreciation, depletion, amortization. Those are their operating costs.
So,
It complicates the books of the utilities significantly. And it runs into several lines that Molly could describe to you, but probably touches more lines than it doesn't.
On the
Yeah.
expense side, you can see it as gas production expense, and about the middle of the,
16 million.
yes.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Now I
Steele.
have to wait through.
Mr. Flynn?
Yeah, just some pretty significant jumps here that I'm curious about. The overtime budget's up by over almost 26%. Gas production's up almost 15%. Materials and supplies, whatever that is up 27%. What's driving that? That's puzzling to me.
The overtime is basically a one-time, because Plant 2A, our new plant, is coming online in the summer of 2016. So that's related to that, mainly.
So we're gonna pay that out of expense to get it up and running.
Well, and also another thing, if you look at the labor budget, that's also partly related to that, because some of the, right now, some of the generation labor, a larger proportion of it is going to capital, it's getting capitalized. But once our plant is online, then a larger proportion of the generation labor is going to be actually operating expense.
It actually, this is the fact that we're going to be putting less of our labor into the capital program by comparison to previous years. So more of it will be in the operating budget. If you looked back to pre-construction time, you'd probably see, I mean, the wage rates are different, obviously, but in terms of hours, it would probably look more like 2016 or 17.
Interested in seeing, if you go back to 14, we don't talk about, we don't break labor out in the 8-year. So it'd be nice to sort of see how that's fluctuated with the,
We can get you historic stuff on that.
yeah. And so that was one.
Okay,
Materials and supplies.
You mentioned materials and supplies. Materials and supplies is actually very consistent with prior years, but last year, we made an unrealistic budget change. When we put most of it in materials and supplies is really what happened, is we didn't want to reduce labor, and so we reduced our budget for materials and supplies. But if you look at over time, our materials and supplies, it's not really significant. It's not actually more than has been budgeted in the past.
And Molly, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in materials and supplies, our actuals are actually going to be over budget
They are.
this year. We're moving money, some of which you guys have seen, some of which has been internal, so that we can correct for what was probably an unrealistic budget amount for that account.
Anything else, Mr. Flynn?
Yeah, but not on that specific topic
Okay.
at the moment.
You asked also about gas production expense.
Yes.
And that's based on Conoco. Conoco's the operator of our field, and that's based on their budget. And some years there's more operating expenses as opposed to capital, and it's just what needs to be done on the field.
It's something, I mean, the expense trend for Beluga is going to get higher as the field matures, both on the CapEx and the operating side. So as we've been discussing related to other conversations, it will become more expensive to operate over time.
And is the depreciation growth due to the fact that you anticipate 2A coming online midsummer? Is that the reason for that jump? Okay, and then finally, Lance said you want to talk about the other line on the revenue side, but you never did. I want to know.
That's also a budget issue last year.
Sorry.
We anticipated a $13 million contract to sell power that did not materialize.
Oh, this is
Yeah.
the VA tie-in, moving to Fossil Creek.
No,
It was NEA,
MEA.
having to do with their plant coming online.
I think there was a robust internal conversation last year as to whether or not that revenue should have been anticipated or not. It ultimately was a part of the budget presentation and was approved. It didn't materialize, and it was certainly in hindsight now, it appears to have been somewhat speculative.
Some what?
You have a gift for.
We shouldn't have asked for it last year. We
Yeah.
did. Away we go. So
You have a gift for understatement, Mr. Abbott.
I went here. I think I know there was. I've seen the paperwork. There was a really strong internal conversation.
Somehow that didn't get communicated.
The general manager won the argument.
Okay,
Anything else, Mr. President?
that's enough for now.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson, Vice Chairman, I got you. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm looking at the 8-year summary here, and at the bottom, the total retail sales revenue, and looks like we're anticipating, about a $15 million jump this year, and then increase the next couple of years, and then it starts going back down. Are we planning a rate increase and then later a rate decrease, or how do we get to that revenue projection?
Part of it has to do with the way that our revenue requirement related to the gas field is constructed. It's constructed on the, related to the debt, and that debt matures in 2018. So we have some ideas internally on ways to go back to the RCA and change our revenue requirement related to the gas field. But since we haven't done that, that's why it's the main reason for why it's going down. So that's part of our rates is associated with that.
You can see if you go a couple of lines above that, you can see that our actual kilowatt sales is expected to be relatively flat.
Right.
So it has to do with rates, not with volume. And as Molly said, debt service is right now the biggest uncertainty in that mix.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Ms. Johnson?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the overtime question. In the past, we've had discussions of overtime and vacancy factor. They seem to play off from each other. And how are you doing as far as hiring some of the positions so you don't have overtime? Is this really just overtime from the 2A coming online?
That's the
So
majority
it's,
of what it
so
is.
it's not the operational issues that we've had in the past.
It's my understanding that this is mainly related to the one-time jump in overtime related to 2A coming online.
Yeah, the increase that's described there is the difference between 2015, where a lot of that overtime would have been charged to the capital project, whereas 2016, where a lot less of it is charged to the capital project. It's overtime is still, 6-7% of labor, and that's high, and that is a reflection of the challenges that we continue to have filling the skilled positions at ML&P. In an ideal world, we would have more base pay and less overtime. And that's a reflection of a challenging marketplace. And I don't think you'll see a different story told by any of the other utilities up here as well.
And then with the ML&P, that it's only $240,000 as far as SAP related costs. I would have thought it was a little bit more, but that's all it is.
I think that's a similar number to 2014. In 2015, the original go-live date, I believe, was January 1st, 2015, or not the original,
Right.
but maybe the more recent one. And so we didn't budget any for 2015. But in 2016, that's a reasonable estimate for what we spent when we were in 2014. That is labor.
Anything else? Okay. I have a question, a couple of questions. So you're going from, you have a decrease, 2 full-time positions for 2016, and then an increase in 3 part-time, an increase of 3 part-time positions, and the increase in labor is $2.3 million. Could you give us a little more details on that?
So the two full-time positions decrease, I think, are what turned into the 3 part-time.
Okay,
Right,
so
that was a
then,
reclassification.
right, so that's my point exactly. So there's no increase in labor in terms of positions. So can you explain the increase in labor, the $2.3 million.
The increase in labor is really basically the ratio between operating and capital labor. So there's less projects going on that labor is able to be capitalized for, and more of it is going to show up as operating labor. Therefore, in this, and therefore this.
Okay, I get it.
And less vacancy in ops and.
Generation.
Okay, thank you. And then my follow-up question is, there's a pretty big increase in travel. Can you explain that? 42%.
Oh, in travel?
Yeah.
I think that's another one where we probably under budgeted last year. I think you'll see actuals this year in excess of 70,000.
Thank you.
And some of that would have been capitalized in previous years as well.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions. Mr. Rover, please continue.
All right, thank you.
We'll go back to Paul.
Yeah, let's see.
Paul.
Why don't we, now, Chair, if we'll just back up a couple slides here.
Merrill-Field?
Merrill-Field, if you don't mind. So we're looking at slide 33. In Merrill-Field, I think for 2015 and 2016, while there's a lot of paper here, it could probably be explained on a sticky note. I think there's some improvements going on at Merrill-Field. They've continued to work on their faction program, but as far as staffing and their operations, I know that the Enterprise Committee, similar to the other ones, is constantly briefed on Merrill-Field. So their 8-year summary, I don't believe there's any highlights. And then their revenues and expenses. As far as personnel, they're making a slight modification in one, in revenues and expenses. And then for their capital program, they do receive a lot of FAA funds for supporting theirs, which requires state match, and then they use other revenues for supporting that. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to you and Mr. Bowers and Mr. Abbott for any questions you might have with Merrill-Field.
Thank you, Mr. Hoover. I don't see any hands. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I see we are going into phase 4 of the security upgrades. And what kind of security upgrades are we making?
Combination of fencing, security cameras, and gate operations. We're doing phase 3, we just under contract with Alcan. That's basically a $4.3 million project, which was do most of the gate operators on field, substantially improve our camera system, and renovate the fencing along Fifth Avenue. Phase 4 will basically be Orca and areas south.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. No other questions? Mr. Rover, please continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Paul. Okay, we're going to get back on track, and Board of Anchorage is up. Mr. Rubico and staff are going to join us here momentarily.
Oh, good work. Thank you. You guys sit right up here. Thank you.
So I think there's no, for this 8-year summary, I don't believe that there's any significant trend changes that you'll recognize in their 8-year projections. As far as the revenues and expenses, their staffing is pretty much the same. They are going to have some modifications in their expenses, and I'll have the port director explain some of those. And then for their capital program, primarily the port modernization project that's looking to complete a project that they're working on for, I think it's the north port, or north end.
We can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, but this is not, I'm sure that we'll talk more about that, because it does not include all the capital needs required to complete the entire port project. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to you and Mr. Lupo you have any questions for the board member?
Thank you, Mr. Wilburn. Mr. Flynn?
Madam Chair. Looking at the metric 2 in report page 5 of the budget book, where reports the net operating income being significantly higher than 2014 and the mid-year 2015. But that doesn't appear to be reflected in 2016 budget. And I thought, maybe I was wrong, that the primary driver of that increase in revenue is increased fuel shipments coming through. Is there a reason that we don't anticipate them being consistent in the 60s?
Yes. The big variation, the big growth in the fuel coming in was some market changes that happened between 14 and 15. And what I believe 15 is going to do is reset the baseline for what will be, what we can expect going forward after that. The big driver behind that is the airport. And the big driver behind the airport growth was that longshore slowdown on the West Coast and a large shifting of cargo movement from water to air. So the amount of air cargo movement through the airport has grown significantly, and with that grew the demand for fuel to the extent that we've gone from 4 tankers in 2013. We had 14 last year. Before this year ends, we will have seen 27. And what the airport is telling us is that's going to establish a new norm for them. They're expecting that to not go away, but they're not looking at any appreciable growth in that going forward. So it's a 1-year big bump and now a new baseline.
It doesn't exactly answer, doesn't actually entirely solve my curiosity. The net income or loss in 14 was 11.25 million to 6 million. Dropped to 6 million, and now we see it rebounding to 9.2. And with revenues dropping from 15 to 16. What I thought I heard you say was you expected fuel revenues to be consistent. So I'm struggling to understand the bouncing.
Yeah.
Is that your summer means right
Yeah.
there?
Oh, I thought it was.
So,
Okay, so I think I understand the question. It's like, so your question is, why isn't the revenue continuing to increase?
no.
Why is it dropping?
Why is it dropping?
Right.
And why is our net income dropping? Or our loss increasing, I guess. I mean, that's partly driven by depreciation, although I don't understand ping pong in there either, but I mean, the numbers are just going all over the place. I'm missing something. I can't figure it out.
So the net income. So,
I mean, let's do this together. Okay, so expenses, the revenues, 14, small jump in 15 when we had a dramatic increase in fuel. Operating cash flow went from 2.5 million mid-year of 14 to almost 6 million mid-year of 15 is our data that we have in the book here. And yet we only see an increase of about $400,000 in revenue. And then we see a drop in 16. We understand that this fuel shipment is the new normal. And then we have expenses going from 23 million to 18, almost 19 million, and then back up to 22 million. And I'm just having a hard time understanding how these things are moving around place.
okay. So I understand. I would say, okay, so I'll try to address to the best of my ability what your questions or what your comments are. So let's just take the revenues. The revenues have not been adjusted for a solid petroleum performance at the port. We haven't counted on those revenues in these numbers due to the fact that we anticipate that we'll get everything that everyone is saying, you know, the same number of tankers next year, the same number of tankers in 2017 as the new norm. But, you know, the revenues, we haven't adjusted those to just take those into account. So I would say, you know, the revenues are fairly conservative estimates based on what we know to be achievable.
Okay, so can't speak for the entire body, but we were pretty unhappy when ML&P came in here and told us that they accidentally predicted $12 million of extra revenue. That
Right.
didn't show up.
And we're not.
But by the same token, we're not terribly happy if you're going to tell us that there's $2.5 million in revenue that you haven't accounted for that you reasonably expect to come in. Is that a fair
It is.
critique? We kind of like budgets to be more or less accurate.
Right.
We do too.
So, right. But,
We do too.
Right.
We don't have, this is, of all the utilities that you look at, there's probably more variability in this revenue stream than any of the ones we have. Maybe disposal on the solid waste side, where we just don't know what's going to come in the gate. So we did not anticipate the dramatic increase in 2015, and that number is a pro forma probably calculated 3 or 4 months ago.
Right.
So it is not a useful estimate for what we really think today that 2015 revenue is going to be. And we can certainly give you that number. We can update that pro forma column based on 3/4 of data rather than probably 2 or less that was there when we built that.
That would be helpful.
Yep,
Right.
we can do that.
But the second part is looking forward.
Yep.
We do anticipate that being
Right.
there, at least some portion of it, even if it's a conservative portion, maybe 20 tankers opposed to 27.
Right. So I would say that, you know, we would be very willing to, at the end of 2015, count that in 2016 and going forward, once we had a more solid, you know, idea that we can count on these tankers coming in. So we would be able to project that going forward with some surety in what we present to everyone and what we count on operating at the port. So I think because it was the first year that we received revenue like that, we were very, you know, we didn't really want to overproject either. So I would say it is an extremely conservative projection, but by the first quarter budget revision, we should be able to provide the 2015 numbers, and we can revise it with those with a lot more certainty.
That would be cool.
Right.
After we move to the expense side,
Sure.
and why we're up and down all over the place over the 14th or 17th.
Right. So a lot of the majority of the difference is the litigation costs that we need to account for in 2016 that was approved in 2015. So in May of 2015, the Assembly approved the $9 million for Safe Harbor Shop. So all of the additional funds required, everything is not going to be spent in 2015. So what we have left over, we anticipate is going to be about $3.5 million that needs to carry forward for the expenses for next year to accommodate the Safe Harbor PO. So that's the difference between the 18 and the 21 is the 3.5 million that we anticipate or that we need to accommodate that PO. It'll drop the fund balance at the end of the year and then be reappropriated through the 2016 budget.
Glad I didn't go for that.
Anything else, Mr. Blair?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just looking at the bottom of the page where it covers revenues and expenses. And I see we've gone from 1 temporary employee this year to 11 temporary employees next year. What are all the temporaries doing?
Well, the one temporary that is consistent from year to year to year is our accounts receivable clerk. It's not really a temp, it's a part-time position, so it falls into that category. The other 10 are, again, associated with the litigation. They were part of the Kelly Services contract, but on some advice from the purchasing officer, we save the administrative cost if we don't pay for them through the Kelly Services contract, we take them on as temporary employees. So it makes it a little bit cheaper, and that's where the other 10 are coming from in that number.
This is the so-called dirt team. These are the relatively low-wage folks that are going through the documents, the boxes and boxes and boxes of documents associated with the discovery, associated with the litigation. So it turned out to be cheaper to hire them as muni employees at, I don't know, $20 an hour or something like that, rather than pay them $25 an hour through Kelly, of which Kelly kept $5. And I'm not knocking that approach. Sometimes we continue to use that. But for this, where it's of this magnitude of work, it made sense to bring them on board as part-time or temporary or both employees.
Great. Thank you.
Can I follow up on Mr. Peterson's question? So, do these part-time employees receive benefits? So they don't?
No.
They're at a certain number of hours so that they don't receive benefits? Well, then it makes sense. Okay, thank you. Mr. Steele?
Are these skilled folks looking for damage assessment? Are these people that do that regularly?
These are people that are just going through
Not
documents.
skills, okay. But they have to identify when they have to identify.
Yep, they're tasked by the attorneys with what they're looking for.
Anything else?
Where are they-
I'm sorry?
Excuse me.
That's okay.
Where are they doing it? Are they doing it in the warehouse? Are they doing it in
No,
the office?
they're actually, a few of them are virtual. So they're receiving a lot of what they're reviewing electronic.
Okay.
Yeah. Where, there's no place you can go to find them all.
They're not boxes.
Green eye shades, working under the lights.
They're in their jammies in their
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to know what they're wearing.
I was gonna say they don't.
Okay, break it up. Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Wilbur, I don't see any other questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So,
Madam Chairman, we didn't talk about the Port Capital project. I can't believe there wasn't a question, so I didn't. We have a $67 million number in this. That is not what we are going to be moving forward. We'll be briefing the Assembly in the next 30, 45 days as we develop our legislative program just to sort of get your expectation in the right place. I predict that our legislative grant request will be more like $200 million. Depending, and we'll be talking to you guys about sort of tactically how to move forward. But we think this may be, frankly, one of the last years where a number like that might be achievable in Juneau for many, many years to come.
Thank you, Mr.
We'll be talking about that.
And that's probably why there were no questions, because it's usually 200 million plus, it was only 67, but thanks for letting us know that.
Sorry,
It's
yeah.
gotta be.
We thought we were getting a bargain.
Thank you. No other questions?
it'll be a bargain anyway, sort of.
So, Mr. Wilbur, please continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So our next department is Solid Waste Services.
Good job.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Brad.
Yep.
So similar to water and wastewater, solid waste will have, the presentation is divided into two. The first will be disposal and then collections. So I think we'll go ahead and start with
Tim?
Come on up, Tim.
Paul's here. I told him we were up next, so he ran out to look north.
We'll get started, and if there's questions that Tim or I can't answer, great. Come on up, Paul.
So the first slide that we have here is a summary of their 8-year summary. And don't believe that there's any wild swings in this one in the long term to bring to your attention as it relates to their revenues and expenses. They have a little modification in the personnel, a little bit in their program. I'll let the departments to speak to their revenues and their expenses as it relates to disposal and our capital program. They have some things that they're looking to improve on, at least as it relates to their service. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm going to turn it over to you and the folks with Solid Waste Services to address any questions you might have with the utility.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. Thank you, training.
Quick question for you. On people that go to the transfer station pay there.
Yes, sir.
Can we add the factor in for using credit cards and debit cards? Would that get-
We actually are almost there. We,
I want to make sure Debbie hears you because that's a question. And if Amy was here, she would ask the same question.
we've, because it's a factor where we had to, actually absorb the cost ourselves for the use of the credit card because of the company we use. We were actually trying to use another service that did not work out for us, so we're actually going to absorb the cost in the future for the credit card service, and that'll be sometime next month, I believe. You'll start seeing advertisements and
Make sure we
social
get the
media
notice out to the
information.
public because I get complaints all the time for people to get there, waiting in line. What do you mean we don't live in this century? We're not taking credit cards. I appreciate you picking up the cost.
But it is taken care of, sir. It'll be online next month, I hope, sometime.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Castillo.
Tipping fees, I see no increase in tipping fees throughout the 8-year summer.
We're actually in the process of still analyzing where we are with our closure costs and trying to determine what if any, we're going to have to increase, and we won't know until we get complete return on the future closure costs and how that'll affect us.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Mbosky?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and let's see. Thank you. I want to make sure I had my mute button off there. Thank you, Mr. Trainee, for asking that question. I'm a little surprised, though. Paul, can you tell me why the department's just absorbing those transaction fees for the credit cards and not just passing along the additional cost?
We're going to be using, I believe it's called Avalon, which is the same service that they use in the clerk's office, and we're tying on to their contract. We could not find another one that would work for us, so we're tying on to their contract, and it's basically set the same way it is through the rest of the utilities. It's the city's contractor, and there is a charge for it, and we absorb it, and so do the other departments.
Okay, I'll follow back up with you offline. I just want to kind of see what the physical note on that would be.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mbosky. Mr. Flynn?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So kind of tagging on to Mr. Steele's question. Yeah, I'm looking at the various rates described. Tipping fees, collection fees, load fees. All of them are flat, with the one exception of the tipping fee going up by $1 at the Central Transfer Station in 2021, and yet I'm reading my book, and it tells me with the higher expenses and additional rate increase will likely be required in the very near future. You mentioned you're doing a study. What's very near future mean?
Well, we're completing the financial analysis on our closure costs now, and we've got those figures back, but we haven't had a chance to complete them yet. So we're in the process of completing that for the landfill closure. We're also doing a study on our collections facility and what our anticipated costs for the next coming years are, as well as what our operational costs will be. And
So definitively, not in 2016. And say 50-50 for 2017. I'm just talking about disposal right now. And probably closer to 80 or 90% likelihood beyond 2017.
And for collections?
Well, there'll certainly need to be a rate change to address any change at the disposal. I don't know at this point whether there'll have to be something related to the collections effort itself. And we can talk more when we're looking at that page. But at this point, they're doing okay, and their projections look okay at their current rate structure.
we are looking at additional services that we're finally going to get to bring online. We've got our recycling dumpsters coming now, so we'll be able to start that service. We're looking at additional services now that we'll be bringing on in the near future. As you know, we were delayed last year in bringing that service on, so this year we're anticipating there is an increase in our revenues listed down in there for in our collections. That will show an increase in, that increase is reflected upon the recycling program that we want to put in, commercial recycling program.
If possible, it would be nice to have this updated to reflect at least an estimate of where you see the rate structure going.
Yeah. And it was at my direction that we did not include that because it was so speculative. I know, bummer. I know.
I'd like to at least have an idea.
We just didn't want to put something out that we couldn't live up to.
I appreciate that.
I think you could estimate that over the 5 out years there, that we're probably going to need around 10% over those 5 years. I don't know which years, and it would be very speculative for me to describe it, which is why we didn't put it in there. But
Well, I won't be around to approve those rate increases.
or to vote against them. Yes, agreed.
Just pay them when you get the bill.
But
Yeah,
others
exactly.
may be, and they may want to know what they're getting themselves into.
Mr. Flynn and Mr. Abbott, outside 3 o'clock.
My money's on Elvis.
Mr. Training?
Paul, on the methane generation, how many generators do we have there taking the methane up?
I'm sorry, sir?
How many generators produce electricity from methane?
We now have 5, and the 6th is on its way. And
Okay, will it be the
almost
same
almost
capacity
ready
as
to
the other
crank up.
5? Same capacity as the other 5 as far as generation?
I'm sorry?
Is it the same size as the other 5?
Yes, sir.
Now, will we still be flaring off methane when the 6th one comes on?
A lot of that depends on the usage from the base, but you'll always have a certain percent of methane that you'll burn off. That will be what we call junk. It has a lot of contaminants in it that the vacuum system pulls over to one side.
Are you looking at adding a 7th generator?
We aren't, but that would be a decision that Doyon would have to. That's their equipment and their property. So
The generators are all owned by Doyon Utilities. They will probably, they told us, they'll put as many generators in as the gas will support. This is the gas they want to use rather than burning N-Star gas or buying power from the electric generators off base. So I think as the gas supply grows, their generation capacity will grow as well, and the gas supply will grow.
Yep. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just looking down at the total positions. I see we're switching over to have fewer temporary employees and more full-time employees next year. Any particular reason for that, or?
it's kind of the way we're restructuring. We're restructuring the positions themselves. Can I explain a little bit on that, Tim?
Primarily what we're doing on the part-time temporary, we have temporaries that come in during our busy season, which is in the summer. And that's basically in our customer service area. So what they're wanting to do is change 4 of those to full-time positions to last longer. We tend to have a problem pulling people in that area. It's a temporary type learning process there. So there's a lot of turnover in that. So we're taking 4 of them and actually making them into full-time positions, so that way we can keep them all year long.
They're going from a 30-hour position to a 40-hour.
Yeah, it's not really a half time, it's more 30 hours. We have 3 that's 30 and 1 that's 32 hours, and making them 40-hour positions.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to follow up on Mr. Peterson's question because it was similar to one I had. And I think you answered it because they were already getting benefits. Right.
Yes.
Okay, because I was looking at the numbers and going, well, that's pretty strategic budget planning if you're doing this, and then the change is only 2%. So, but anyway, thank you. Ms. Johnston?
Yeah, as far as recycling and your, what's the spread now? Are you working for SmartFit? Actually, it's not SmartFit anymore. As far as recycling.
Rock 10 is the name of the company, and they were bought out by another company. Yes, we are working with them now. And currently, we're in the process of working with them on a new contract.
What are we paying now per ton, Paul?
It's $40 a ton now.
We're paying $40 a ton?
Correct.
We're paying that. So it's an avoided cost of $20? It's not very good.
Not very good.
I wasn't a firm believer in us getting into this to begin with, so
And if you add the collection portion on, we're drawing real close to the disposal rate.
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Steele?
Yes, we brought, ordered 3 new trucks, I think, this year.
Yes, sir.
Front loaders, I think. And we still do not have the capacity for roll-on, roll-off, to take back any of the.
What we're doing currently now,
Hold
Mr.
on, let's just say, that's a collections question?
Yes.
We can move to that. Madam Chairman, if you're ready to talk about collections, we could do that. That's where Mr. Steele's question is taking
That's
us.
true, yes.
That's fine, Mr. Abbott. Thank you for asking.
Okay, so maybe Lance can put the collection
Yeah.
slides up?
So, going over to the second half of the solid waste services business. Their 8-year summary, I don't believe that's similar to their disposal. I don't believe there's any significant highlights in this. Maybe Mr. Alphenbar can point them out if I missed any. I think on their revenues and expenses, their personnel on this side of the business is constant. And then leading to their capital program that may address part of Mr. Steele's question. Leave it with that, and Madam Chair, back to you and the department.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. Mr. Steele, would you like to follow up on
Just like to hear the answer to the question.
Yeah, basically, what we're looking at, what we're doing right now is we're in the process of completing a study. We have consultants on board that are helping us determine which way we need to go, whether it's roll-off service or. But we are looking at going into the roll-off service, compactor service. We're looking at the cost versus revenues to make sure that we don't leap into something that's not going to be beneficial to the city.
I guess one of the other options was a lease arrangement where we allow people to operate within our determined area for a fee.
That is similar to a franchise fee where we charge them for every container in town that they put in our area. There's also a couple of other ways that we can look at doing it. There's a system called a bagster system. That's a nylon bag. There's 6, 8, and 10-yard bags, and you just sell the person the bag, and it has the disposal and everything in the price of it. And those are picked up with a winch truck.
Yeah.
So that's another option to look at. We just want to make sure that we don't get into business that actually brings us down instead of bringing us up.
Do we have that capability right now, winch bags, or do we need more equipment to do so?
We probably need a couple more trucks to make that happen, but those trucks are a lot less expensive than a collection vehicle.
I do want to commend you in terms of your customer service. I had a broken hinge on one of my containers this last time around. Next morning it was fixed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. I don't see any more questions. Oh, I'm so,
Well,
Mr.
you
Trainee,
going-
I'm sorry.
We're our monopoly. Are you going through all the greatness we have with the various companies that are coming into our area and evaluating whether we want to keep giving them the break to come into our area? Are we going to end them or what?
That's all going to have to be handled kind of first we're going to have to handle it inside, and then we'll have to have a discussion on how to deal with it later on. But right now what we do is we're letting them come into our area is they file for an exemption.
Yeah.
And currently we're not charging them for that exemption. But in the near future, that is something that we need to look at doing as a possible revenue source.
I would appreciate you looking into it because that's money that we're losing.
And the challenge comes in that our service area was set up somewhat arbitrarily, and it doesn't feel right to simply charge people for something that we're not capable of doing, and we've chosen not to do. At this point, as Paul said, he's looking at getting into the roll-on, roll-off, the container business, and that's the primary area where we've granted these exemptions. if solid waste is can provide the same service at a competitive rate, my preference would be that we would simply take over the business rather than charge someone for doing work that, for whatever reason, we choose not to do. So that's still a work in progress. As Paul said, we're studying that right now, how much investment would be required, whether we could perform the service or not. But that's, I would expect that in the next 6 months, you'll see a recommendation from us that would, either get us into this business or continue with something like the status quo.
Currently, what we're looking at right now, Mr. Trainee, is we're looking at starting into the commercial recycling business, which means we're actually going to put dumpsters out in our service area. Once we can provide a service that someone else is doing, then it's required by ordinance that they take their containers out and we put ours in.
Mike, thank you for your briefing on that. Much like SAP, that was the past administration. The current administration, well, Paul, you tried to get these vehicles roll on, roll off. You're denied the ability to get that equipment.
That's correct.
I want to make sure we made the decision to get the equipment so we can offer that service to the customers. Right now, we're bypassing them. Another business is coming in. I want to make sure we're picking up that because it's our area.
We're studying it right now. If we can do it without, as Paul said, without hurting the overall business, we'll probably propose that change and the rate structure associated with it, which you guys would have to endorse.
Thanks, Mike. I just want to see the request come through to get the equipment.
Okay?
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Steele?
I am not knowledgeable enough to know, have the boundaries of our service area changed over time, or is it what was originally set up as the old town and it stayed the same? That's number one. And number two, if so, is there an option for us to go to RCA to straighten out our boundaries or more efficiently collect and do things? And if we're doing recycling or leasing or whatever, do we have to go to RCA for?
No, sir. We would, the rates are already set for all the dumpster services that we have. We're still servicing the original service area that was granted to the municipality itself, which is the city of Anchorage area, city limit line. And that's the original area that we're servicing. In order for us to change that, that would be something that would have to be done by the ordinance, by an ordinance change and through the process.
The way the city is developed, it just, in some cases, it's irrational.
It is. The boundary for the solid waste service collections area makes no sense, especially over on the east side of town. It is not. It's similar to, but not exactly the same as the old city boundary. And it evolved. However, it evolved 20, 30, 40 years ago, and that's what Paul and his predecessors have been working under. There hasn't been. I'm not aware of a change in that ever.
It's not only
certainly not in modern memory.
Not only inefficient for us, it's inefficient for the other folks that pick up for us.
Right, and it's not the solid waste service area. It's not just a commercial arrangement. Inside the solid waste service area, it's mandatory collections. Outside of that, it is optional collection. So it's not just the issue of who picks up your garbage. It's whether property owners are required to have collection service. So the change in the boundary would be a very consequential issue, whether people were leaving or joining the Paul's service area.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just happened to notice that under other collection revenues, we've got a 215% increase from this year to next year. I'm just wondering where
That is what we're anticipating for the commercial dumpsters, a commercial recycling program that we're going to be implementing.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Ms. Johnson?
I guess I was going to remind my colleagues what Mr. Abbott said about we have to remember that this service area is mandatory. And it isn't as far as our dumpsters. And so, this won't be any decision I'm gonna make after April, but you need to be aware that even though it could improve the enterprise unit itself, it's still a mandatory service area, so it's different than the rest of the municipality. The other, to Mr. Steele's question, solid waste services does not go to RCA. We set the fees. We set the tipping fees. But when we do set the tipping fees, then outside of our service area, they go to the RCA. And so whenever you look at increasing the tipping fees, you have to understand the repercussions to the service area outside.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I need to follow up on the service area question because I learned something new just now. I knew that it was mandatory for solid waste services to pick up garbage, but I did not know that it was voluntary for the other folks to pick up garbage. And one of the reasons why it's mandatory for us is because of health reasons. So how do they get away with that?
Anchorage is primarily a non-mandatory service community.
Yeah.
That's been the history of it. And I challenge you to tell the difference between a neighborhood, especially over on the east side of town, between a neighborhood, in terms of the character of the neighborhood and the, whatever the community benefits of mandatory collection might be, to tell the difference between the two neighborhoods. There is a difference in the accumulated refuse on properties, and our code enforcement folks deal with that consistently. You can trace the line of the service area, and you can map out the complaints about refuse. I can't remember the term of art. It's nuisance, or anyway, there's a term that has to do with essentially garbage piled up, and there's a lot more of them outside the service area than there are inside the service area, because property owners are required by law to have garbage collection, and they do.
And under solid waste services. Now, I've seen a lot, knocking on doors, a lot of health hazards.
No, believe me, the other collectors would love to see mandatory collections outside of the solid waste service area. They're real big fans of it, and you've heard from them to that effect in the past. I think it varies from neighborhood to neighborhood, but I think the last I heard from Alaska Waste, or whatever they're called now, was that residential properties, it was between 80 and 85% had collection service, and commercial properties was a little lower. So in the 70s or something like that. So there is a big difference in how the two parts of town deal with garbage.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Mr. Flynn?
Her and I are having a little discussion. She's just mandatory. I'm not on my side of the road.
Yeah, Tudor's the southern boundary through most of town.
I guarantee you, my decision was not on mandatory pickup.
Do you have collection service, Mr. Trainee?
You what?
Do you have collection service?
Absolutely.
There you go.
Yeah.
Mr. Flynn?
Yeah, I think just maybe should have light this Madam Chair. First off, you may recall that there's been periodic discussions about solid waste services being acquired by a private contractor. In one of the iterations of the conversation, I think it was before either you or I were on the assembly, the precondition was that the assembly approved mandatory collections throughout the municipality, and that was a non-starter with the administration at that time. I think Ms. Johnson was privy to that conversation. But in terms of the historical part of it, a lot of bargains were struck in order to achieve the unification of the city and borough governments back in the 70s.
Well, I was still in New Jersey.
Yeah, and I wasn't actually all that talkative at the time.
I
think I was in preschool,
Yeah.
but I've done a lot of historical research on it, and the service area issue was
Front and center.
yeah, it was sort of how they solved the divide between people who were outside the city and inside the city in unification by granting that we'll call it
Free will?
free will, whatever you want.
To continue the service and to become.
I appreciate this. I'm a little bit familiar, but I really appreciate you.
So that's why these characters have like
Yeah.
15 or 20 or 25 road service
Right.
stations. They're just-
Thank you so
Well,
much
that's the reason
for your
that some
comments,
parts
but-
of their area does not have Parks and Rec service,
That could
but they still
be
get to use it all,
up
just don't
near
pay
to
for
that.
it.
Police coverage.
Anything
Down to
else
Girdwood?
before we
That's it.
continue? Thank you. Mr. Trainee?
No.
No? I don't see any other questions, so Mr. Wilbur, let's continue.
So, Madam Chair, the
Thank you,
last.
guys.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it. Madam Chair, given the fact that we are almost an hour ahead of schedule, what I would propose that we do is, I know Mr. Hussle is not available, and so reached out to his office and suggested that instead of waiting, if I could do my best to, I will do my best to run over Community Development Authority, but frankly, if you have any questions from ACDA, what I would propose is I'll take those questions, I'll get them to Andrew, and I'll respond to them, back to you in writing before next Wednesday.
I have a two-part question.
Okay.
We do have a resource behind you.
Yeah, I'm Amelia, I'm the finance director.
Amelia.
Yes.
Homeland. Well, come on in. So maybe you can help address some issues.
This is Lance Wilbur, in case you don't know
Have a seat right
him.
here. Andrew's on his way? Well, just, you know what, you're gonna do such a fabulous job, by the time he gets here, you're gonna be done.
My question is probably not for Ilya.
Okay.
Good to see you, though.
Nice to see you.
And this question was sort of deferred from last week as to what we're doing with the HHS building.
Okay.
And the lots, the adjacent lots that you guys own, the old hotel, and it's now a parking lot, and so on. One of the things we talked about last week was obviously replacing the HHS, but also potentially co-locating other municipal facilities. So if there's an update that Andrew could provide, that would be appreciated related to that.
Okay.
Ms. Johnston?
I don't have any questions on finance, I know you.
I see that there's an increased professional fees, and I'd be interested in what that increase is and what's it for.
I can respond to that. It is a placeholder primarily for the new administration. If we get new development projects, we just want to have some revenue, some expenses that we could plan for if a project comes online. For example, legal services, other professional services to validate the feasibility of any project that comes along. So that's basically a placeholder. We have no identified expenditures at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Johnston. Do you want to continue?
Give me a minute because I.
Well, let me go to Mr. Trainee and I'll come back to you. How's that?
Page 32, what is mobile license plate recognition?
That is a new technology that's available for identifying basically scoff-law vehicles. And we had it on the 2015 capital budget and we haven't moved forward. So again, we'll see if we will in 16.
So how would you envision it would?
One of our vehicles, one of the Easy Park vehicles would have software in it and some sort of a roving eye that would scan license plates and would identify any vehicles that has X number of outstanding tickets or citations.
Okay. But you know it cannot be used to determine license plates that are not registered or anything.
Correct.
Anything that relates to law enforcement, it can't be utilized for that.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll make sure before the people start calling.
They're after you, Trainee.
Ms. Johnston?
I'm trying to remember. I had one this morning and now I haven't even seen it anymore. So.
Well, we're like an hour ahead, so.
Oh, if I remember, I'll.
Okay. Okay, great. Any other questions? Well, we're
Mr. Flitton's heading out here.
at the end of the work session, so Ms. Johnson, you want to ask the questions offline?
Yeah, no, I'll.
Okay.
I'll-
Ms.
I
Zimbowski,
remember what it
any
was.
questions before we end the work session?
No, ma'am, no questions right now.
Okay, well, we're just about to end, and I just have one comment. I was wondering when we were going to receive the responses to questions that we had a week ago.
So the responses, we were hoping to provide them to you. We have it today. I don't know if we'll be able to do that. We have them pretty much all done except for 2. We needed some information back, so if we can't provide them for you by the end of the day, that you'll have them on Monday. We just needed some verification on 1, but everything else we have responded to.
Okay.
What's the date, ma'am, for our amendments?
I haven't even worked through that yet, Mr. Trudy. But anyway, we're scheduled for another work session, tentative work session on the fines and fees, which I think we really probably need to have. And that's scheduled for the 23rd. Do you know the status of that?
So the item was from the administration. We're working it, we're loading it into the municipal system now. We've confirmed with the clerk for the 23rd, and so I think you should schedule that. I do not recall the time, Madam Chair.
Okay, that's all right. And okay.
Lance, can we get that a little earlier for the 23rd so we can go ahead and go through it and have our questions available for you on the 23rd?
As it regards to the fines and fees?
Yes.
Yeah, and actually, I think if we can get this successfully loaded, I think there's been a request that we run it by the Public Safety Committee, which I believe means next week. So if we can accommodate that, we can come and give a very brief summary of what that entails.
So you're looking at raising $1.5 million on?
So it's 1.9 million collective. The traffic, the APD related, is about 920,000 or 950,000. It's roughly $1 million from APD. The other is from the library, DHHS, and Parks and Rec accommodation of.
And just one more comment, and I'll let you go in a second, Ms. Johnson, but I'll work with Rose so that we can come up with a schedule for the amendment process and the forms, et cetera. So look for a memo from me through Rose, probably sometime next week. Ms. Johnston?
And I gave you 4, now I think 5 or 6 overall budget questions.
So we loaded those into, and those will all be in our response.
And I think one of them was a verbal because I saw sort of, I was confused what you were doing with the fire department. It was conflicting. And with your experts, I'm curious, because you have an increase in numbers of AFD members, will there be an increase in
The chief and I are working that. We're working that as it relates to their overtime and as it relates to the timing once the academy, which will come online, and so all of those things.
Because that would make a difference in the overall budget.
It would. Either the allocation or the amount or both. So, yeah.
And thank you, Ms. Johnson. I have 2 questions, okay? I'm sure I can find it, but it'll be easy just to ask them and answer. So, how much fund balance is available, and what's the dollar amount of the tax cap?
So the amount of the amount under the tax cap, correct me if I'm wrong, Maryland, is about 186,000.
Okay.
And then your second question, Madam Chair.
Fund balance. How much fund balance is available?
So I think Dan Moore estimated that the projected fund balance that we would be looking at in first quarter would be about 3.4 million.
There's still obviously a lot of moving parts that have yet to fully resolve, but revenues are up and revenues appeared like they will come in over budget, and expenses will definitely come in under budget.
Right, and I know that we have to deal with these numbers, well, mostly during first quarter, but my question is any of this anticipated fund balance included in the 2016 budget already?
No.
Okay.
Only the portion of it associated with the tax, the resolution of the tax case and the tobacco settlement.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, there are no further questions or comments? Questions, Chair?